Hey everybody, I'm Aloy, and you might know me as the host of Prince's Friend, the YouTube channel. Where we do deep dives into Prince's music, lyrics, career, and messaging, and we've been doing it for about 5 years now. And the first thing that I want to do is give a huge thank you to the event organizers here who didn't say no to me speaking. I mean, the idea of discussing the first 10 years of Prince's career is a lofty one, and I feel like it's deserving of the attention and respect that everybody gives it, and I was convinced that me pitching hey, the first 10 years was fine, but not really his best. He did way better stuff later on. I had thought for sure that was going to be an automatic no, but I'm very happy to know that the conference is open to all voices, so I want to thank them for that. Now on to the topic at hand. Prince the first decade, and how, to me, it was just the beginning. When Prince set out to conquer music, he finally had the chance to make his dreams come true. He had a plan, knew exactly what he wanted, and figured out how to get there. It was going to require releasing just the right songs, targeting specific audiences to maximize growth, but eventually he realized where the mountaintop was, and when it was time to start focusing on the music singularity where everything had kind of come to a head. So let's start with '78 to '81, the foundational years. Included in this era are For You, his self-titled album Prince, Dirty Mind, and Controversy, where Prince is kind of just now finding his voice. He's learning the business now a little bit more from the inside, and he's making a name for himself. So when we start off with For You, by most accounts, For You was a successful debut album. It mixed rock, funk, dance, and chopped it all together into a single experience that flows from track to track. It set the stage for his ability to go hard with songs like I'm Yours and Soft and Wet, or to go soft with songs like Crazy You, So Blue, Baby, any of these. These are great songs. The album itself was released during a weird transitionary time, though, so the late-era disco feel was kind of on its way out, which means that some of the best songs on For You often kind of go overlooked in favor of the more modern sound that they were getting into in the early 80s. Sales were good, but not great, so Prince wanted to more hyper-focus on the next album, which was Prince, his self-titled album. And Prince has famously said that this was around the time that he learned how to write a hit, and he did so on this album. He employed it a few times, actually. When It Be Your Lover, I Feel For You, Sexy Dancer, those were the huge hits for him, hitting the tops of the US dance and R&B charts. His focus on electric guitar, though, and his more rock vibes on this album helped gain traction with his white audience. Prince knew that he didn't want to be only a black artist, not only because it was limiting in terms of the ability to earn money.
Cufflinks like this cost money, okay? Let's be frank. Can we be frank? If we can't be nothing else, we might as well be frank, okay? So,
because you're not going to sell out the giant stadiums unless you have, the majority of the people listening to you. But also with reach, he wanted to be a crossover artist on the radio, in live, on studio, everything. He wanted everybody to listen to his music. Part of that strategy, obviously, was getting a band together that had men and women, black and white, and everybody was involved. Really, really cool thing that Prince was doing in terms of marketing. Yes, talent was there, but talent even came second to how is this gonna look? Then we get into Dirty Mind. This marked a change in course. He decided to double down on the rock vibes, going full tilt into the sex-fueled punk album of Dirty Mind. This is the same year, of course, that other punk bands like the Pretenders, the Dead Kennedys, and the Flesh Eaters were releasing albums in the same genre that have gone on to be some of their biggest of their careers as well. It was a risk since it diverged so much from the sound of the first two albums. But hits like Dirty Mind, When You Were Mine, and Uptown, those kind of proved that this album really was a winner. Prince could feel the change coming when it comes to the music industry and where the sound was going, and he wanted to be part of what would set the course out in the ocean instead of just catching the same current as all the other ships. And if Dirty Mind was him on a ship, then Controversy was more like Prince's ability to cut down the sails, strap on a motor, and make this thing into a motorboat and go in whatever direction he wants to, regardless of where the wind blows. I've often thought of Controversy as Dirty Mind 2, taking the sexy punk vibes and then adding pretty straightforward political messaging on top, which was also the trend in punk music in the 80s. Prince proved he had staying power with #1 hits like Controversy and Let's Work, and community favorites like Sexuality and Private Joy. But Prince's foundational years were an amazing start to his career, so strong that they have remained favorites to many fans long after he released albums which, by all accounts, are superior in their production, songwriting, and instrumentality. But even at this point, he was still growing and building towards his eventual goal of stardom. 1982 to 1985, the Stardom years. The Stardom years are where Prince was the height of his 80s fame, and that all began with 1999. Once again, Prince turned his musical voice and personality on its head and pushed Warner Brothers to approve the release of his first double album, 1999. With a huge push from MTV, the larger-than-life performance videos of 1999 and Little Red Corvette not only propelled his music onto the radio, but also made him a household name. Everyone knew what he looked like, what he sounded like. They knew his music. They were waiting for his videos to come on TV. They rushed to the record stores to buy his albums. It was really, really an amazing feat. Everyone knew who Prince was in 1982. And with his hit singles like Let's Pretend We're Married, Delirious, and Automatic, still to this day, Automatic is one of my all-time favorite Prince songs. This album was really a powerhouse that few have been able to top. That is, except for Prince himself. The success of 1999 fed into a new deal for Prince and Warner Brothers that led to a huge rock opera movie, multiple award-winning soundtrack. He won an Oscar for it. Obviously, I'm talking about Purple Rain. There's a reason why everybody thinks of Purple Rain when they think of Prince. This was the height of his popularity, where not only was the music amazing, not only was it accompanied with visuals that was the music videos, yes, but mostly it was this movie that created the character of Prince, even if some of the things were true, but a lot of it was not true. But what it did was solidify this being the kid as Prince. Prince also around this time was creating Vanity 6, Apollonia 6, The Time, The Family, all of this stuff around this time. He was creating so much, and he not only created personas for himself, but for lots of other people. And he used those to propel his fame and to propel the fact that everybody kind of knew who he was. He created the time to be an enemy that he would then topple. It's kind of interesting, and it's really kind of amazing when you think about it, because Prince said, I am an underdog against this other band. Who's the other band? Oh, it's this band, The Time, that I created, but I'm going to beat them now. It's stuff like that. It's the pageantry. It's the theater of it all. And I feel like Prince understood that when it came to Purple Rain. Yes, the music was amazing, but really it was about the theater and the show of it all, because it was show business, and what he wanted was to be a star. Okay, I won't spend too much more time on this album, as so many have already done detailed breakdowns on the album, its messaging, its impact on his career. Hell, I've done several videos myself on my channel about that topic, but suffice it to say, it's his biggest selling album by leagues, and it was his highest moment in the limelight. This is where he realized what was achievable if you game the system and pull all the right levers, essentially becoming the maestro of the symphony of success. I threw in maestro, a friend of mine calls him the maestro, which I kind of like. That brings us to 1986 to 1988, the experimental years. But what happens when you switch everything up? Will the fake people who lauded you at the top of your fame stick around, even if you aren't that famous anymore? Or do you keep churning out the same sort of thing that got you famous and become a one-trick pony? Or do you take this time to experiment and figure out what's going to propel you forward, what's going to keep you going, as opposed to just staying in the past and continuing to do what everyone expects you to do? Well, even before the dust settled on Purple Rain, the biggest album of Prince's career, the man was already recording Around the World in a Day. I've always seen this album as a challenge to people who loved him for Purple Rain. When you listen to Around the World in a Day, do you love Prince or do you love that one album, Purple Rain? He started branching out in this album. He started playing around with more psychedelic soundscapes and changed up the style like by a lot. Yes, it was still funky. It still had the general bare bones of what Prince was doing, but he was incorporating so many different types of music. Also, Around the World in a Day had minimal promotion because WB, Warner Brothers, was still focused on Purple Rain. Around the World in a Day still was a great seller and gave us some amazing hits like America and Raspberry Beret. But Prince was not content to just continue on with Purple Rain. He didn't want to be typecast. He didn't want to just be known for that one thing. Who would? Who would want that? It's so weird. After that, he did Parade. I mean, that's where Prince took on different classical influences, incorporating new things into his music once more. The album was still funky again, with hits like Kiss and Mountains, but also seemed to kind of test what the Prince community was willing to put up with. The album was short. The themes were more connected to the movie than was a standalone. Let's not even get started on the movie itself, which I love, and I find it to be kind of a comedic classic for me, but a lot of people really didn't like it.
Honey, don't you know I slap the waves out your head?
But this album just felt very different, almost like it wasn't even Prince, which is weird. Interestingly enough, it stands as one of the community's favorite albums. I believe it's because he not only went like just drastically anti-Purple Rain on Parade, but he also executed it so well that people they couldn't say no. They were like, what? He did? Of course this is a yes. This is an amazing album. And then we get to Sign of the Times, where Prince got rid of his band who had he been sharing the spotlight with. He created a new triple album that was then narrowed down to a double. It has some huge classics on it, like the title track Sign of the Times, If I Was Your Girlfriend, You Got the Look, Housequake, Forever in My Life. Just so many. I could list off a million of them off of this, and probably not because there's only so many songs. But, you know, it really shook the music industry in terms of sales, in terms of the genres explored, and it showed that Prince was capable of doing all of it by himself again after having been tied to the revolution for the last half decade in a lot of people's minds. Again, with Purple Rain, he created this character, and this character had a backing band named The Revolution, and they were the greatest backing band ever in the world, and that was what he told them. And then he got rid of them and was making amazing music still, so...
Still a group, right?
No!
And honestly, a lot of people felt like it was a great return to form for Prince on Sign of the Times, but it was also quite different, a departure, a transition to a new phase for Prince. He was doing a lot of things in the background. He was recording at a lot of different studios, but they had already broken ground on Paisley Park at this point. So he was leading up to something. Then we get the Black Album / Lovesexy. Prince briefly released the Black album before pulling it back and releasing Lovesexy, which is definitely in, I'll say, my top 5 Prince albums. And in my opinion, this was where the old Prince was no more, and the new, more spiritual, more grounded Prince was born. Lovesexy is a celebration of God, or love, and sex, and everything in between. It was politically minded, it was socially aware, it was beautiful, it was religious and spiritual, funny and serious, and it let everyone who was listening to Prince at the time know exactly what was to be expected going forward. Now, it didn't sell as much as Sign of the Times, but that is not the point. Because let me lay this out.
I've seen the future and it will be. I've seen the future and it works.
Prince started off rough and was really trying to find his voice, trying to find his sound. He wanted to make his name and build that foundation for a career, a life in music. Then he became a star, and being a star allowed certain benefits, so experimentation occurred, with some wins and some losses, I believe. And at the end of the first decade, Prince had a revelation, an epiphany of sorts. He started the next decade off with his own recording studio, Paisley Park. He started the next decade firmly rooted in his belief in God and preached that in the studio, on stage, and everywhere else he could. There was very little in the way of wordplay to hide the religiosity of what was happening in his music anymore, which is what we found out a lot of his early music had. Now that the foundation had been built, he had already achieved the highest level he could, and he experimented until he found this new voice for himself. And this was the voice that he was going to use, whether people liked it or not. He had already worked so hard to achieve at least a certain level of freedom from having to worry about the repercussions of what music he felt like putting out at the time. Obviously, the real fight happened in the 90s. We're not going to cover that here today. But we were all the beneficiaries of that creativity, of that remarkable creative streak. A lot of people talk about his prolific nature in the 80s, as if he didn't create a triple album's worth of music in the 90s called The Dawn that WB refused to release. Like he didn't create 3 albums worth of material in 2004, being Musicology to Slaughterhouse and The Chocolate Invasion. As if he didn't release a triple album in 2009, Elixir and Lotus Flower and MPL Sound. Like he didn't continue to write and produce for himself and the other acts at the same time throughout his entire career. Like he wasn't also filming movies and working on soundtracks for people and bringing up brand new artists and mentoring so many others and going on tour all the time, as if he wasn't still doing that. So again, I feel like honoring that first decade of Prince's career, 100% it's a great idea. It was huge, and it was where we all saw him for the first time. It's where he had the most fame. It was where he was on top of the world. But I'm really hoping that no one treats it like it's the end-all be-all of what Prince was. He went on to create some amazing music for decades after that, and a lot of it was more mature, it was deeper, and I'll just say it, some of it was better. So don't forget that Prince was way more than just the 80s. That first decade was just the beginning. Thank you for your time. I've been Aloy, Prince's friend. You can check out the Prince's Friend YouTube channel. I hope that you have a great rest of your weekend.